You. And joining us now to take a closer look at this, Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney and now a professor at the University of Alabama School of Law. She is, of course, an MSNBC legal analyst. And David Cay Johnston, founder of DCReport.org and author of The Making of Donald Trump. Joyce, let me just begin before we delve into some of these other questions about a point that Pete Williams raised there, which was this flip of the Justice Department reviewing and perhaps even revising its decision from 2019 to say that there is now a legal purpose. It doesn't have to be simply a legislative purpose in terms of why the tax returns should be handed over to this committee. Is that a common practice, or could a critic perhaps be looking at this and say, well, that's because there's a leadership change or a political change in the Department of Justice? Under Trump, they wanted to protect him. Now it's different.
While I would expect that there will be some criticism of this move by OLC, the Office of Legal Counsel, changing the rule here, in reality, Eamon, this one is pretty fair and square. The language of this statute is plain. It says that the Treasury Department shall provide. It doesn't require any sort of a legitimate purpose. It doesn't even require good faith. And so this has always been one of those surprising decisions to me, frankly, when even under the Trump administration, these tax returns were withheld because the language of the law is mandatory. It's not subject to interpretation. OLC is, in essence, correcting an error. I suppose that might open the question about whether OLC will be reconsidering any other previously issued memos, most notably including that memo on the inability of DOJ prosecutors to prosecute a sitting president. Yeah,
and whether or not it was actually operating in true independence back during the Trump era. David, you've been covering Donald Trump's financial affairs for a very long time. How big of a deal is this move?
Well, I think it's very important, first of all, the principle be upheld that of the 1924 anti-corruption law, that these tax returns shall be turned over. The IRS has the Ways and Means Committee, or the Joint Committee of Congress on Taxes, has 3 people stationed at the IRS just to look at tax returns. They do it all the time. And the earlier Office of Legal Counsel opinion was nonsense for many reasons that Joyce mentioned. But in addition to this, Donald Trump said he was being unfairly treated by the IRS because he was who he was and because he was a Christian. And that alone would give reasonable grounds, if you accepted the argument of Trump and Steve Mnuchin and the Justice Department, to look into his tax returns to see if he was being mistreated and whether there's a need to reform the law. So I think this is a very important decision to uphold the principle here that Congress has the right, as does every president, to see any tax return on request.
So, David, what should the committee be able to learn from these returns? I mean, you know tax returns certainly better than I do, but as the tax returns ultimately get handed over to these committees, what are they going to reveal?
Well, the biggest single concern, and Nancy Pelosi talked about this today, is national security. Is there something in the returns that tells us that Donald Trump is beholden to some foreign power or interest that we did not see? I mean, I think that's the first most important issue that needs to be resolved. And we don't know the answer to that. And the tax returns, by the way, may not provide it. Secondly, Donald Trump's tax returns, we have very good reason to think, are probably fraudulent. Why? Well, Donald had 2 civil income tax fraud trials. He lost both of them. They were New York State and New York City trials. I broke the story of this, I think, 6 years ago now. And those returns were so fraudulent that Donald's own witness, his longtime tax lawyer and tax accountant, testified that they were forged. If Donald Trump would forge a tax return, then I think there's good reason to suspect there's other unlawful activity on his tax returns.
Joyce, what does this mean in terms of legal trouble for Donald Trump? Could he, as Pete was asking there, could he potentially challenge this? And given the other decisions about his tax returns in previous courts that made it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and certainly involving the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, could he mount in your opinion, a legal successful block from this being handed over to Congress?
I guess those are 2 different questions.
Yep.
Can he mount a challenge? Certainly he can. Will it be successful? It's unlikely here because the language of the law is so very clear, saying shall provide. But it's really important that we restrict our understanding here. There's a difference between this House and congressional oversight proceedings and any sort of criminal proceedings. The House is required as part of the deal when they access returns of an individual to only view those documents in a setting that protects the identity of that individual and their tax information. Prosecutors, either state or federal, obviously have separate routes for obtaining taxes, as Manhattan DA Cy Vance did. Federal prosecutors, if they had, probable cause to open an investigation or a good faith reason to open an investigation, could certainly go their own route to obtain any necessary tax documents.
The news, Joyce, about Donald Trump's taxes came hours after the House Oversight Committee also released handwritten notes made by the former acting Attorney General, Richard Donahue, during a December 2020 phone call in which Donahue says the president told him, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and Republican congressmen. I know that you've had a chance to look at some of these notes. What else do they say, and what do you make of them? What's your big takeaway?
These notes really reflect, I'm just going to say, a robust conversation between the former president and top officials at DOJ. What stands out here is he appears to have threatened them, saying that if they won't play pool, he'll replace them with another DOJ official who he had been introduced to by one of the congressmen identified as one of his allies in this reporting by the New York Times. So, look, I don't think that there are any surprises here. I don't think that there's anything that folks didn't assume was going on. It's very stark to see it reflected in official notes taken by a DOJ official. And beyond that, DOJ fights pretty fiercely on most occasions to protect its internal work product from outside eyes. But here they've turned this documentation over to Congress. That suggests that they believe that there are important and legitimate oversight functions that need to go forward here. It's a very unusual step by DOJ.
Yeah, and I should just make sure I said it correctly. He is the Deputy Attorney General, not the Attorney General. Joyce Vance, David Cay Johnston, thank you so much for starting us off this hour.